I'll give Dr. Parker's introduction. Dr. Parker currently serves as the Director of the Sexual and Gender Minority Research Office at the NIH. Dr. Parker was instrumental in the formation of the office in the fall of 2015 and was appointed as Director in June 2016. The office coordinates NIH research related to the health of sexual and gender minorities across the NIH institutes, centers, and offices. In her new role, she also serves as co-chair of the Trans NIH Sexual and Gender Minority Research Coordinating Committee and has served on the committee since its inception in 2011. Dr. Parker comes to the Sexual and Gender Minority Research Office from the National Cancer Institute, where she served as acting branch chief in the NCI Office of Science Planning and Assessment and Women's Health Officer for the Institute. Prior to this, she was the special assistant to the President's Cancer Panel. She began her career at NIH in 2001 as a Presidential Management Fellow. Dr. Parker received her Bachelor of Arts in English from Indiana University and her Master of Social Work from the University of Michigan, where she studied community organization, social policy, and evaluation. She completed her Ph.D. at the University of Maryland School of Social Work. Dr. Parker?
Thank you. So thanks for coming. So a couple of disclosures. I'm hoping this can just be more of a conversation. So I have slides. We'll go through them, but feel free to interrupt me. Also, I'm not a program officer. I've never been a program officer. I have a lot of program officer slides. I work with a lot of program officers. So this is the kind of thing I often do if I'm at a university because I'm already there. And so I'm happy to kind of answer questions. I can connect people. I promise you at some point today I will say that's a question for a program officer, not for me. So that's just my disclosure that that I can sort of, we can kind of muddle through this together. I do this often, and I think it can help, but that's not my role at the agency. So so most of you probably know the NIH has 27 institutes and centers. They all have different missions. They all have different priorities. And they oftentimes have overlapping missions. So when you think about places like NIDA and NIMH and NCI, there can be lots of overlapping projects if you're looking at, you know, something like smoking and depression, right? So where do you go? Like, you don't always know what institute or center to connect with. And oftentimes you could have a project where one institute that you think, oh, it makes perfect sense, they'd be interested in this. They might say, actually, we're just not interested in that right now. But another institute might say, oh, yeah, that's totally aligned with our new priorities or whatever. So it's good to talk to many different people across many institutes if your research looks like something that could fit in a variety of places. So I mentioned they have different missions and priorities. They also have individual budgets, and they have varied funding strategies. So even the kind of process of getting something funded can vary from institute to institute to institute. So you probably know about funding opportunity announcements, and that this is really sort of the way that NIH communicates about their research priority interests. And so you can get those through NIH, through grants.gov, or through the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts. So I assume that many of you are subscribed to the NIH Grants and Contracts email. Possibly. So that you can get a digest version of that every Friday. I get the digest version myself. One thing I think people sort of forget about that is that you can find an FOA that fits perfectly with your project. You're thinking about submitting something, you're working on your thing, and you never look again at the guide, and a notice could come out, right? So we recently put out an administrative supplement, and when it was posted, whoever posted it clicked a button, and it said we were going to accept all mechanisms. And then we were like, no, we're not accepting all mechanisms. So then we had to put out a notice that said we're only accepting these mechanisms. Well, then we got 2 applications that were under mechanisms that we weren't accepting. So they were non-responsive. And so because the people didn't read the notice that came out, they wasted all that time on a supplement for our office that we couldn't accept. So it's just really important to sort of keep up with what's happening in those. And the digest that comes out on Friday, I can look at in about 1 to 2 minutes. You can kind of very quickly get through it. And then obviously every FOA is issued by sort of a main NIH institute or center, and then there are other participating components. So I'm not sure if this is like too elementary for people, but I think FOAs in general can be really complicated for people. So all of the things that we put out are called funding opportunity announcements, or FOAs, and then there are different types of FOAs, right? So there are program announcements, and so what makes a program announcement sort of special is, like, we have some program announcements out in sexual and gender minority related research at NIH. So, for example, we have one on the health of transgender and gender nonconforming population. It's broad, it's open for 3 years, it's got standard receipt dates, and lots of institutions and centers are signed on. And it's very much like a broad call for, like, hey, we're interested in this work. We don't have money put aside for it. We're just super interested. We know this is an area where we need more work. So that's basically a program announcement. And then there are different kinds of program announcements. So a PAR typically has special receipt, referral, or review consideration. So that might be a program announcement that an institute or center puts out, maybe possibly on their own, and they do internal review. So it doesn't go to the Center for Scientific Review for general review with all the other grants that come in, and there could be specific reasons why they want to do that, right? And those kind of vary. And then a PAS is a program announcement that has specific set-aside funds. So most program announcements, there's not money set aside. We just say, well, we're going to see what comes in, and then we'll see how it scores and if we can fund it. So the PAS actually has a specific set-aside fund. And then there's requests for applications, and those tend to be very narrow in scope. So there's typically one single receipt date, and it's reviewed by a scientific review group that's unique to the RFA. So it's an area of research that's very specific. They pull together a specific review group. There's one receipt date, so they just accept applications one time and fund off of that. And then there's typically money set aside. So this is just for people who want these slides afterwards. This is just a kind of chart that gives you a sense of the different types of program announcements, requests for applications, and parent announcements. So parent announcements are really important, especially in an area of research like SGM research. So we might have a broad PA that's out on the street on SGM health, but maybe 10 ICs have signed on. So if you want to do research that's specific to an institute or center that's not signed on to that program announcement, you don't just like go, oh, well, I guess I can't do my research. I don't think you should do that. What I think you should do is look at the parent announcements. So the parent announcements are just broad investigator-initiated announcements. So like, you want to do research on something, we don't have an FOA about it, you can still submit your application to a parent announcement. I have not figured out the benefit to submitting under a specific funding opportunity announcement versus a parent opportunity. There must be. I can't figure out what it is, right? I think everything still just gets kind of triaged and review. So I would say don't ever give up, and also be talking to your program officer. Reach out to a program officer, because even if their institute or center is not signed on to a specific FOA, they might know of a different FOA, right? So if you want to do work on SGM and diabetes, I shouldn't pick on them because I think they might be on that funding opportunity. But say you want to do SGM and diabetes, but the National Institute on Diabetes Digestive and Kidney Disease did not sign on to the SGM. Well, they might have another FOA that's on like diabetes disorders in health disparity populations, right? Where that would be a perfectly appropriate FOA to go through that versus the SGM one. So I would say never give up. You can almost always you can find an announcement to submit your work under. So this is the grants process overview, and I just share this to give people kind of a sense of how long this can take, right? So once it gets sent to NIH, there's a pretty long waiting period, which I'm sure many of you have experienced. I'm sure it's painful and it's kind of awful. And once you submit, program officers aren't technically supposed to talk to you. So you're kind of out there by yourself for a long time. But that's just the nature of the beast. So in terms of program officers, so as most of you probably know, they oversee a portfolio of funded applications. They give advice to researchers who want to apply for NIH funding. That would be you all. They have access to additional knowledge that's not readily available to the field, and so they are really great people to have relationships with. They convene and attend meetings to identify research gaps, And they really work on sort of the strategic planning at the scientific level of their institutes and centers. And the program officers are also the people who are working on and putting out funding opportunity announcements. And so that's sort of all within their realm. And I just like to point out to people that advising researchers who want to apply for NIH, like that is their job. People get paid to talk to you. So do not be afraid to call them. We were talking earlier about kind of what's the best way to do that. You know, I would say don't reach out to a program officer if you don't have specific aims. I think starting with an email with your specific aims attached is always a great idea, requesting a time to meet with them. As I also mentioned, not every program officer is as approachable as I would like them to be, right? They're all human, and so sometimes you might get someone who's a little more difficult to work with than someone else. But that's just sort of also the nature of the beast. But I would say just remember that it is their job to talk to you and their job to kind of help you understand the NIH process and all of the bureaucracy of the agency. And so the ways that they help is they can talk about your specific research idea and how it relates to their institutes or centers' mission, the vision, their priorities, their strategic planning. I think NIMH is like a great example if people have ever done research with the National Institute on Mental Health. Several years back, their director went, the pendulum sort of swung in this super kind of like basic biomedical way where they were funding a lot less behavioral social science research and a lot more of like the biology of the brain and that type of stuff. So that people sort of knew that, and then the community started to say, well, NIMH isn't interested in X, Y, or Z. Well, there's a new NIMH director now. So the pendulum started to swing back a little bit to a little more balanced place. And so program officers are knowing sort of where the institute and center directors are headed. And so they can certainly help you kind of understand. And honestly, they will sometimes say, like, we're just not interested in this. Like, this just won't get funded. You know, it just won't. So, so that's always really helpful. They can also talk to you about what the best research mechanism for your project is. You know, so sometimes people might come in with something that's an R21, and the program officer might say, actually, this is way too big of a scope for an R21. Like, you really need to think about this as an R01, right? So there's lots of ways that they can help you think about the mechanism. They're particularly helpful, I think, in helping people who are interested in training awards, right? So they can kind of help you. There's all these different K awards and all these different ways that you can think about laying out a research career, and they can be very helpful in that way. They can also advise you on the funding opportunity announcement under which you should submit and the study section that you might want it to be reviewed at. So you can request a study section in your cover letter. It doesn't mean that CSR will always send it to that study section, but I think it's good to have a sense of where you want it to go and then request that. Okay, so in terms of obtaining NIH funding, so when you think about some of the resources at NIH, I have several slides at the end, some web links and resources. I was saying to Megan, like, we really have I hate saying to people, go to this website, but we have a lot of really good information on websites and YouTube videos. I oftentimes will go to those resources when I need to better understand something like CSR. And so those can be really helpful. But I would say that the first thing you can do is go to Reporter. Do people here know about Reporter in general? Yeah. So that's a really great place to look at, like, well, what is the kind of stuff within my area that's getting funded? Who are the program officers? What institutes? You know, like if there's a specific study that's sort of related to what you're doing, where did that end up landing? What institute funded that? And then you can also look at not just who the program officer is, but you can look at who the PI is, what institution they're at. And so you can really think about this as a way of mentoring within sort of the larger scientific community and connecting with people sort of across the country or the world who are doing similar research to what you're interested in. So you definitely want to make use of the NIH resources. Obviously, you want to talk with a scientific mentor. I know in some institutions, especially if you're interested in SGM health research, you might be the only person who's doing that work within your school. So, it's always important, depending on what you are looking at, to make sure that you're talking to an appropriate scientific mentor. And then certainly think about your concept and your application and how you can get that reviewed internally and get feedback from your colleagues. I always say to people, especially like a lot of the SGM health research is in behavioral social sciences stuff, and I think most of those applications can be written in a way that my mom can understand them, I think. And I think the assumption, I think people make assumptions when they submit that every reviewer is going to know what cisgender means. They're not, and they're not necessarily going to look it up, right? So you obviously don't want to write an application that talks down to reviewers, but you also want to make sure that you're very clear and concise in what you're doing, and that submitting your concept for internal review from people outside of your area or outside of your department can be super helpful. So one thing that I hear program officers say over and over and over again is to reach out to your program officer early and often. Do not call a program officer a week before an application is due. Just don't do it. It'll just annoy them, right? Rightly so. They're sort of like, why didn't you reach out to me 6 months ago, right? So when you're first starting to think about a project and you first do your specific aims, that's when you reach out to them and you kind of try to start developing a relationship. Also, they would say find a scientific mentor, preferably somebody who has NIH funding. At all institutions, that's not always easy, but you can reach out to people at other institutions. And then certainly we mentioned submitting this concept for internal peer review is really going to help make your application as strong as possible. So the types of research grants that we do. So when we think about training and a career timetable, I think this slide is incredibly messy, but it's good for people to sort of have on hand. But everything we fund is really, when we think about training, all the way from T32s all the way through to when are you going to be getting your R03, your R21, your R01, and there is a progression, right? So people don't expect that your first R01 is going to happen as soon as you finish your T34, right? There's going to be steps to your career, and I think the last data I saw, the age of a first R01 is 43 or something. So people are not coming right out of the box and getting these humongous R01s, and so R03s, R21s, R34s, there's so many different applications, and then lots of different K awards, right? So really thinking about if you're mid-career and you've been doing something for a certain number of years, but you're interested in shifting into another direction, we have awards for that, so people can get mid-career Ks. So this slide I think is helpful, not necessarily in this discussion, but as a resource for people. So people mostly know about R01s, right? This is sort of the most well-known grant that we fund. It provides up to 5 years of support with direct cost of up to $500 per year. So you're talking about really a substantial amount of money. If you have an application that's requesting direct costs more than $500,000, you need prior approval before you actually submit. And obviously you need preliminary data. So you might have a great idea, but if you have no preliminary data, we're not going to give you multiple $millions. So the R03 and the R21. So the R03 is a small grant. It's up to $50,000 per year. And these are really great, I think, for people kind of just getting started. They maybe want to do some secondary data analysis. And I think me personally, for the R03, I think that's just a great way for people to kind of figure out how to work the NIH application system. You know what I mean? You have to be sort of writing grants, understanding sort of what makes a good grant. And I'm always saying to people, there's really 2 ways that you have to be successful in order to get an NIH grant. One, you obviously have to have stellar, scientifically meritorious science, right? The science has got to be good. But you also have to be really good at grant writing. That's just a fact, right? So, and so some of that is we're getting a team together where some people might be the really good person at understanding how do you write a grant. I'm always saying to people, this probably isn't true, but imagine that the person reviewing your grant has already reviewed several. It's 11 o'clock at night and they're on their second glass of wine, right? So bold some things, like make it as easy as possible for your reviewer to understand what it is that you're trying to get across and the importance of your work. So the R21 is like exploratory developmental grant. So these are 2-year grants with direct cost advocacy of $25,000. So still a fairly substantial amount of money. Those don't always need preliminary data, but lots of times it's good to have preliminary data in terms of the R21. So the R34 is an intervention development grant mechanism. I haven't seen a ton of these, at least in like SGM research, but these are really great. They're pretty big, right? So they're up to 3 years with a budget not to exceed $475,000, and pilot data is not required, but it's really about sort of preparing to develop an intervention. And then the Academic Research Enhancement Award, the ARCA Team. Did you tell me that you guys are eligible for this, right?
Medicine is not, but our other
Pharmacy is
okay, so some of West Virginia University is eligible for these grants. And these can be really great because they're specifically for domestic institutions where they don't have as much research support from NIH, like as much research dollars. And so this is a way to get institutions to get more NIH funding, but not sort of historically had as much. And so that's kind of a great one. And importantly, the PI can't be the PI on another NIH grant at the time of the award. So it's about getting sort of new PIs at underrepresented institutions. So I'm not sure if folks are interested much in the SGM stuff, but this kind of gives you a sense of some of the recent things that we have put out at NIH related to this. So the only thing our office does, because we don't have grant-making authority, is the administrative supplement program, and we co-fund with the institutes and centers. So there have been a couple of program announcements, and then this RFA that's looking at individuals with disorders of sex development as a one-time risk-beat application. So these are the types of things that we have put out in terms of SGM work. Most of the SGM portfolio comes in through FOAs that are not SGM specific. So these FOAs are great, and it definitely is a signal to the community that we're interested, but I think it's about 60-some% of our funded projects come in through other avenues in NIH. So here's some common problems in NIH applications. This is not from me, this is from a program officer who is the co-chair of our coordinating committee. And so she basically has said, that for them at NIMH, this is sort of the common problems that they have recognized. And so not significant or not new research, so you can certainly go into Reporter, see what's been funded, make sure you're looking at the literature, make sure that your idea is actually sort of new, right? And then you have to make it relevant to health, and so you kind of have to make it easy to understand how significant it is. A weak rationale, low impact research, too ambitious. I think this they have said across the board, particularly in K applications. Like in a lot of the training areas, people sort of have this idea of what all they can get done in 2 years, and reviewers will kind of know like this is just not realistic, and so they don't want to sort of set you up for failure and have you not be able to complete your project and be successful. Unfocused aims, that the career plan does not match the research plan. Again, this goes back primarily to training awards, Ks, that kind of thing. Lacking methodological rigor, little feasibility or preliminary data, little consideration of mechanisms, few publications, and a lack of institutional support. And so these are kind of all the things that they have seen in applications that have not gotten funded. These are sort of the common things. So in terms of grant writing resources, so I said I hated just telling people go to these websites, but that's what I'm saying, is go to these websites. So if a lot of these websites I've reviewed, and it's just really good information. We have, so this is about grant writing resources, tip sheets. This is the grants basics, and I've gone through some of these in this YouTube channel, and a lot of this information is super helpful and kind of helps people as they're thinking about getting started, like where do I start, and understanding like what you kind of need at your institution. I do have people sometimes call me who are just like, I'm interested in doing more research. I'm like, great. Are you at an institution? Well, no, I just graduated with my BA. Okay. Like, so let's talk about what you could do there. But like, you know, we don't just hand out money to people, right? We give money to institutions. And then I mentioned subscribing to the NIH Guide to Grants and Contracts and kind of why that's so important. I had a very sad example, I thought, related to our administrative supplement about people who didn't read the notice that we had to submit. NIH offers regional seminars on program funding and grants administration, and so I don't know what sort of the new dates are, but these are through the Office of Extramural Research. They do several different tracks at those, so they have like a whole track for people who do the financial management budget stuff at institutions, and for, you know, everything from like someone who's interested in applying to the various different positions at an institution, so that there's more of that structural support at a university for doing this work. So like I said, I don't know when the other ones are. These are not free. Our office is beginning to host regional seminars that are one day. They're focused on SGM research, but we're taking like several program officers with us doing Grantspersonship type presentations, talking about missions and priorities, pulling established researchers into the mix to talk about how they sort of got to where they were, and then having roundtable discussions so that students and early investigators and post-doc can sit around and talk to people who either work at NIH and who have had established careers in this area. I'm sorry, did you say your office is doing that? Yeah. So we had one in May in Boston. We have one in February 22nd at UCLA and one May 30th at Emory. And I think next year at some point we're going to be in Philadelphia. So people are specifically interested in SGM health research. And then these are just video casts of some of the types of things, right, that we have. If you go to the Office of Intramural Training and Education, some of these are NIH and NIH staff only, but others are just for everybody. So here was a talk about the imposter phenomenon, overcoming the fear that haunts your success, and that was just at one of the major sort of NIH symposium on graduate research, and so those kinds of things can be helpful. And then CSR, you know, I've been at NIH for 17 years, and CSR is still sort of a black box to me. And so when I have questions about CSR or study sections, I go here and you can find a lot of really great information. I think they have like the mock peer review panels that you can watch that are videos, and so this can be really helpful for people who sort of feel like CSR is a big black box. And I think that's all I have actually prepared, so I'm happy to take questions or have a conversation.
So most of the grants are not applying to a specific SGM PA, and then how do they get routed to you? Is it in a cover letter that somebody might identify, or?
So they don't get routed to me. Okay, so the only way that I know that stuff gets funded in SGM Health Research is if a PI emails me, which happens a lot because I know people will email me and be like, hey, my pay got awarded, right? But that's, you know, and sometimes program officers will be like, hey, we just funded this, whatever. Otherwise, I go into Reporter to find our stuff, and that's how I track them. We don't hold any of the grants, right? So there's plenty of work that gets funded at NIH in SGM Health that I don't know about unless I can find it in Reporter, right? So I just know that it's happening, and there are specific program officers at every institute or center that sit on our coordinating committee, and so those are the program officers who I'm most connected with. But there's plenty of program officers at NIH, honestly, who I don't even know, who might have one or two SGM-related applications within their portfolio. I try to go out to the institutes and centers a lot to give presentations. Our office has been around for 3 years, and there are plenty of people at NIH who don't know we exist because we're so small and because NIH is so huge. And so I try to go out to people and say, hey, we're here, we're a resource, let me know if I can help. But people don't, I don't get like a list.
You provide information to help people enhance the diversity in, particularly in training type grants. The T32s, I think, of mostly where, you know, we're really under the gun to demonstrate how we're promoting diversity. And so often that gets pretty narrowly defined as just underrepresented minorities. Does your group or your office provide information on how to promote SGM diversity or implicit bias training, that type of thing?
So we're doing some of that internally at NIH. There's been a lot of issues related to, like, you know, is SGM underrepresented in biomedical research? We don't know. I don't know. I can't say. So that automatically makes an SGM identity, like, you're not eligible for certain things that it would be good to do. So we've been talking about that a lot at NIH about how can we demonstrate that if yes or no, we don't know, SGM populations are underrepresented. So we've been talking about trying to collaborate with M.S.W because they do the big, I forget what that survey they do of all graduates is called.
Survey room doctorates.
That one. Right, so that could be a place to start where if they were asking about sexual orientation and gender identity, we could start to get some data.
Get it done.
But, right, so we would like them to.
I take it each year.
Yeah, we would like them to ask those questions. And there's been talk, mostly by me, about can NIH start asking these questions of applicants, right? So, and those are just all sort of discussions that are happening. I don't think things are moving quickly enough in that arena, but there's a lot of, like, those types of things are more complicated than I even knew, right? So the way that you have to work with OMB and, like, you know, all that stuff has to get, like, approved, and the cost for adding those questions, like, into our ERA system are apparently much more than I thought it would be, you know, so we're definitely talking about those things a lot, not made much progress. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. I mean, it's just, from our standpoint, it's a little frustrating because sometimes we feel like the pendulum swings pretty quickly, and then we're caught without the data that we need. You know, suddenly a new FOA comes out for a T32 mechanism in an institute, and they suddenly want a piece of data that we just haven't been collecting. And even our application process for students is still, you get a choice of male and female, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are some challenges, for sure.
So there's no way to subscribe to this section specifically. You just have to take a look at all funding announcements, all program announcements.
Well, you mean study section, or you
Well,
just mean
not study
SGM
section,
stuff?
SGM stuff.
So we have a listserv, and when an FOA comes out that I find that's relevant, I send it out to the listserv. And that, I think, has sort of helped. I send out other things like when NIH announced SGM as a health disparity population for research, I sent that. Like, those are the kinds of things I send out. I send out postdoc opportunities. If someone's recruiting in a department that's doing SGM health research, that kind of thing. We talk about our seminars. But, I mean, there aren't a lot of FOAs at NIH that are specific to sexual and gender minority populations.
Researchers applying. A little bit more about your office's role, because obviously you said that program is cert, and it's not an institute on its own. So,
Sure.
But obviously there's an important role there. So can you just say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So, so we sit within the Office of the Director, and so in the Division of Program Coordination, Planning, and Strategic Initiatives. And so our sister offices are like Office of Research on Women's Health, Office of Behavioral Social Sciences Research, Office of Disease Prevention, and so really areas that NIH has designated, like, these are cross-cutting areas where we want people sitting structurally within the OD to work with all the institutes and centers. So while we don't have any grants, we don't have like a grant portfolio, we try to work with all the institutes and centers to say, listen, these are some areas where your mission and your priorities intersect with SGM health, right? To sort of raise awareness and to get people understanding that, like, this is a priority at NIH, right? We have a strategic plan. We're trying to expand the research in this area. The 21st Century Cures Act called out SGM health research at NIH, that NIH needs to expand this research, and so we're sort of there to kind of help the institutes and centers understand that type of stuff. So we do a lot of coordinating. I have connections across all the institutes and centers in SGM health, and so I was saying to Megan earlier, like, I'm always saying to people, you can always start with me. I'm happy to have an initial conversation with people. You can send me your specific names. We can get on the phone, and I can connect you with the right person. So I'm often your first call. I should never, ever, ever be your last. So I do a lot of that facilitating. And so that's kind of the role that I serve as, like a one-stop shop for people. Does that answer your question? We also do things like the seminars. We did a measurement workshop. But I try not to do anything in our office that an institute or center could do or should do, right? Because we're very tiny. It's me and one contractor. We have a small budget. So I leverage resources. I rarely pay for anything totally on my own. And I definitely, like, if it's something that an institute or center would take on, I don't do it. Right, so like we did a workshop on SGM measurement and methods. That doesn't fit squarely within any institute or center, so we took that on because it made sense. Same with like the regional workshop. So we try to identify things that if not for our office, they would not get done. So that's how we sort of think about what we do.
So getting
you can take a chip from an hour ago.
so getting an official designation of SGM as health disparities, does that translate into any strategic advantage in applying for grants or going through certain pathways?
So, sort of, I would say. So I look at it in a few ways. So it definitely, I was mentioning it in my lecture that I've heard from people at various institutions that designation really validated their work. And like, especially with like their colleagues, their deans, their chairs, it sort of justified like the work, the research that they were interested in doing. And so that legitimization has been helpful. At NIH, it means that any FOA that gets sent out that targets health disparity populations, SGM population, research with SGM populations is now included within that like scope, and it would be considered responsive. Our loan repayment program at NIH, there are several different types. One of them is for people doing health disparities research, so research in health disparity populations. So now if you're doing research with SGM populations, that is included. And you don't have to also have an intersecting. So before, people would try to apply to that and say, well, that's fine if there's another intersecting health disparity population, like if you're looking at rural SGM or, so that's helpful. So it is not considered a minority population, right, which is different. And so for things like the loan repayment, the minority health loan repayment program, where your status as a minority researcher makes you eligible, SGM population, like as people who identify as an SGM are not now eligible for those because we don't have the data to say if they're underrepresented or not. So, and those categories, I believe, are specifically laid out by OMB. And so the NIMHD director has the authority to basically designate health disparity populations, but not minority health populations. Does that help?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
In your experience so far, which of the institutes funds the most SGM research?
So NIMH funds the most projects for mental health. Allergy and infectious disease spends the most money. So because they have like some really large, like the CFARs, like really large AIDS-specific centers that have a ton of money, and so big portions of that money will get sort of designated. But in terms of projects, NIMH funds the most, followed by National Institute on Drug Abuse and the National Institute on Child Health and Human Development.
Specific to SGM or Asian?
Yeah, SGM specific. Yeah. I think in general, NCI probably funds the most, and then NIH LBI, than NIAID. I mean, not necessarily our top one.
So when did your office first come about?
September 2015.
Because in reviewing F applications, I did see an SGM study, and it was really misdirected to NIDDK. I mean, they did have diabetes in there, but it was clear they wanted to study it in HIV, and for some reason they were trying to go under NIDDK, which
Did the applicant request that?
I don't know. You know, we don't see those letters.
Yeah.
We just see
Yeah, CSR,
that.
again, I don't always understand how decisions of CSR
But
are made.
it was one where the applicant would have done well to have engaged with you, but I'm thinking it could have been before 2015. Although, God, it came back 3 times.
Or the person honestly maybe just didn't know our office existed.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know.
I feel like I get a lot of phone calls, but I also know there's like hundreds of people out there doing the work that probably don't know.
Right. And I mean, the major problem with it was they were trying to make it diabetes related, and it wasn't working.
Yeah.
It just wasn't working.
A program officer would be a good person to get advice on that.
Yeah.
I have a question about, I don't know if you can answer this, but do you know about the likelihood of NIA funding SGM-related research, or would you recommend going through NIMH?
No, NIA is super interested. So, there's a program officer there who primarily holds this work, is awesome. So I'm happy to connect you with her. I think, so looking at our portfolio can be deceiving. So you look at stuff and you go, oh my God, NCI is like the largest institute, it's like gazillions, billions of dollars, and they've got like 5 projects. Like, that's absurd, right? But then you hear a program officer there who says, she told a story once that something I was with her at, where she went to her division director and she was like, they're the division that funds most of the health disparity stuff at NCI. And she went to him and she said, we have got to do more in SGM. He's like, totally, yes. And he said, how many grants are we funding in our division? And she said, 5. And he's like, 5? That's absurd. How many came in? And she's like, 10. And he was like, okay, so that's pretty good, right? So I keep saying to people, like, we can't fund what we don't get, right? So sometimes people are like, I can't believe X Institute isn't funding anything. Like, maybe they're not getting application. And if they're getting one application and it doesn't get funded, like, right? So it's really about, like, we need to get more researchers understanding this work, interested in this work, and applying for grants. Because if you look at this, if you look at the SGM-specific FOAs that have come in, if you look at everything that's come in and what's gotten funded, the award rates are pretty standard for, like, NIH award rates. So there is not, from my perspective is not that there is a systematic bias against this work at any institute or center. So I just don't think that's the case. And I think there has been what I consider like some historical trauma within the field. And so I understand why people are sort of not necessarily trusting NIH or not feeling like NIH is a supportive place for this work. But by and large, I have not experienced any of that through my work. So, but NIH is totally interested and they're very engaged in our work. They don't get a lot of applications, but like they're always the first to, if I need help with something, they have co-funded stuff with, I mean, like they're great.
So if you think this is an appropriate advertisement, and if people in fields are interested, tomorrow Mike Marshall is coming to both give a noon conference in behavioral health Grand Rounds, and he's been an NIH-funded researcher looking at sexual minority youth, including mental health and substance use issues, and is not part of the kind of AIDS-funded empire. So he's been kind of in the game for about 20 years, and he has some time available in the morning, so if people are interested, come talk to me.
Okay. Mike's awesome. Like, he's great. And he, you know, he's a good example of someone who's been able to, like, forge a career. He's obviously really good at grant writing, and his science is very good. And so he's And he
He's really
sits on, he
pushed some
sits
of the
on
limits.
study review,
Yeah.
like, you know, he's definitely been successful at NIH funding.
And sort of I think he also has incorporated some positive spins on at-risk youth and risk-taking activity. So it's not all about how many bad things can we quantify, but what helps kids who are facing challenges actually become successful and more than, so he's kind of done a nice mix of that.
I have another question. I guess, do you have any advice for graduate students interested in applying for a T32 who don't have like their primary advisor funded under NIH?
That's what you want to do.
Oh, yeah.
So I bet a lot of program officers might say to get a co-mentor, one who's funded through NIH. And that's probably the best advice that somebody would give you, just because somebody who's gone through the process and been successful is going to have some more of that sort of grantsmanship, grantspersonship perspective. But you also, if you're looking at an app, you would certainly want to start talking to a program officer, and they would be able to give you some advice on that.
CSR tells us that we're not allowed to require NIH funding by the sponsor, that they have to be funded so that the research is supported. Now, that doesn't mean that the bias isn't there, but that's what we're told. We can't say they don't have an NIH funding.
Any other questions?